two quartets. One will do the Beethoven and the other will do the Messiaen. Let's welcome.
All right, thank you very much. Just a quick note, I'm kind of getting over a little cold from last week, so my voice is a little soft. So if you can't hear me, just speak up. I did bring a little speaker if I have to. I know I could use this one, but then I can't walk around. You know, I have a little head. So just tell me if you can't hear me. I should be okay. I'm getting better. So thank you very much for our performers today. We'll have the other quartet a little later. And we're going to start today just a little introduction of some different ways and how we can talk about musical style. Now, has anybody didn't come to the last lecture? Anybody didn't come to the last one but came to this one? Yeah, a couple, no problem, great. So just a couple quick things that we discussed last time that hopefully will reignite our mind and show us. So last time I introduced this concept to you. Now raise your hand if you, now don't be shy, raise your hand if you came last time but you didn't write anything down. Nobody? Okay, all right. Raise your hand if you came and you wrote some things down. What, nobody wrote anything down? Okay, there we go. Raise your hand if you went and tried to go use those things that we talked about last lecture. Anybody? One person? 2, 3, 4? How many of you tried to apply active listening steps to your practice or your listening or your homework or, you know, just going to a concert and trying to apply active listening steps? Was that anybody? Okay, I hope so, because this is the goal, right? I don't just want to stand up and talk and then say, oh, that's a cool idea, and then you forget about it. Right? The idea is that you try to find a way to put them into practice, because this lecture is for everyone and you should be able to apply it to your music, whether you're a string player, an orchestral instrumentalist, a singer, if you are a composer, a conductor. I know you have many different styles and types of performers here at the conservatory. So just remember, right? Doing through action is the best way to truly understand something. So I hope all of you are able to take these ideas and put them and apply them to your studies, your learning, your performance. All right? So let's go ahead and move on, but I hope none of us are in category number 1. Let's all try to be category number 3. Let's all understand. All right? Now, again, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand anytime. I'm happy to try and do my best to answer your questions. So, today's topic is musical style. And the reason I teach my lectures in this order is that last lecture was our fundamentals, our basics, our words, our vocabulary, and then now we can start to find ways to apply these to music. But now we have to answer the question, what is musical style? Now, this is a difficult question because it's a very broad word. So who can help me? What's style?
For example, classical and pop music.
Okay, so we have eras, right? Stylistic eras, we call them. Okay, what else? There's more than one answer.
Some technical phenomena in music.
Okay, so technical style, technical phenomenon, okay. I would say, okay, phenomenon. Phenomenon is something that's like strange that happens. Like, oh, that's such a phenomenon that the sun came out at a certain time yesterday, right? Mm-hmm. So technical styles, right? Our technique, right? Our technique can determine our style, the way we play or the way our instruments sound based on our technique. What else? So far we've covered eras and we've covered technique. Is there anything else that has style? What about Miss Crystal has a very stylistic scarf on today, right? What is style what we wear, right? That's our style. So how can we describe that into people? Musical style. Do composers have a style? Their musical personality. What about countries? Do countries have a style?
Yeah.
Could you have Chinese stylistic music? Could you have European or Russian or French or German? American, yes, all right. Any other things that can have style? Could these individual performers have their own style? Yeah, just like we can have our own clothes. Can they, as a group, have their own style? Yes, right? So there's all these different ways we look at musical style in so many different levels. There's the style of the composer, the style of the era, the style of the nation or the culture that they're coming from. So there are three definitions. The first one, characteristic manner of presentation of musical elements. This is probably the most basic definition. The musical style, the melodic style, the rhythmic style, the harmonic style, texture, color, form. Form has a style. There were certain styles that forms happened in that they don't happen in now. Now we also said a distinctive compositional manner of an era, country, or artist that makes that music unique. How is it that we listen to a piece and we say, oh, that's Bach, right? We don't have to know, we don't have to look at score, we know that's Bach, that's Mozart, that's Beethoven, right? Or we can say, oh, that's Russian, because Russia has its own musical style. We know what the music from Russia typically sounds like. We can say that's romantic, because we have our context clues. Now the last one is a distinctive performance practice that differentiates music performed by a specific ensemble or artist from that same music performed by any other ensemble or individual. This one's a little complicated, but basically it just says that no two performers are going to play something exactly the same, right? And the version of the Beethoven that we hear tonight is probably different than the way the Kronos Quartet would do it, or the Tokyo Quartet would do it, or the, whatever quartet's out there. So basically, eras, composers, countries, artists, groups, ensembles all have their own style. But what's important about style is that it all depends on taste, right? Now, that word, taste, what does that mean?
The feelings we get
The feelings we get when
listening to the piece.
Okay. I don't know if I would go that far. I would say that's more experience or your emotions. Taste is more specific. What is taste? Now, taste is most closely related to eating, which we all do, right? Some of us like sweet food, right? I 冰淇淋. Okay? I love sweet food, super sweet food. My taste is very sweet. I eat sweet candies in Shanghai, and it's not sweet, right? I need that super sugar Dairy Queen, all right? That's my taste. Your guys' taste might be different. The reason that Beethoven wrote a certain way that he did is because that was his taste. That's the way he liked to write music. The reason that we can say that the classical stylistic era all sounds the way they do because they all had a similar taste in music, the way that they approached how they did it. So taste is what matters. What we like, what we don't like. Why does this conductor do this phrase this way and this conductor do it this way? Well, it comes down to taste, right? Now, we have many things that we can layer onto that. We should have a thorough knowledge of the work, of the piece, of the background, of the composer. Then, once we have a good understanding, then we can inject our own style and our own ideas into the piece. We call this good taste, right? If a person doesn't do those things, that's considered bad. All right? Bad taste. Yeah, that piece was performed in really bad taste. that was a classical piece that they performed in a totally romantic style. And so it's bad, we say that that's bad taste. Of course, some people like that, but it all comes down to taste. Any questions so far? So to give us a little example of taste, I said last time I always like to start with some music. Now, I'm not talking about the Beethoven yet. I'm going to save that for a little bit later. But I wanted to give you guys a listening example. Now, I wasn't sure if any of you, I know there's is there a musical theater program here? You guys do anything like that? Yes, I thought so. So I tried to cover all my bases, not always do classical style music, do some other kinds. So I wanted to give us a different kind of example. Now, I have a quick review. Now, who remembers the 3 steps from last lecture? Who can tell us?
Describe.
Okay, describe. Number 1. What's the question we ask ourselves when we describe music?
What do I hear?
What do I hear? All right, the most fundamental level, the facts. What do I hear? Does the music go up, down, short, long, soft, strong, right? The most basic things. What's the second step? Analyze. What do I think? Now I'm taking the information I heard, I'm doing things with it, and I'm thinking about it. I'm analyzing why it might sound a certain way. And then the third step? Interpret. Okay, good. You guys all were awake last time. Ask yourself, what do I feel? Now, last time we talked about how the problem is that we always do this one first. We always put our opinions to the music, and we talk about how it makes us feel. It makes me feel happy, right? So you could say, first violin, could you play that more happy, please? Right? It's not very helpful. I mean, not yet. No, don't play yet. All right? Okay? So it's the idea that we want to describe first so you can say why you want it to sound a certain way. And this is how we can approach doing describe, analyze, interpret to musical style. All right? So I have 2 examples for you. It's not classical music, but it's something we all, I'm sure, know. I want you to listen to it, and then we're just going to practice what we did last time. All right? Here's the first example. This is a certain musical style. The second example is the same piece, but a different. Right there. Okay, so how can we describe this? What can we use to describe it? Yes? Soft. Okay, but now let's try to put it in context, right? What is soft? The melody, the harmony, the rhythm, the texture, the color. How can we make sure to put it into context? What is soft?
The color is soft.
The color is soft. So we could specifically say the color of the singer's voice is soft. Okay, what else?
The melody.
Let's let some other people have a chance to answer. Everybody, don't shout all at once.
The tempo is free.
Free tempo. Right, rhythm. So that's part of tempo is a part of rhythm. It's a very free rhythm. Does anybody know the technical term for that? Rubato, right? Kind of speeds up or slows down. Rubato literally means robbed time. You take some time here and you put it back here. So, tempo rubato. What else? So we've talked about the melody. We've talked about the rhythm. What about the harmony? Now remember, K-I-S-S. Keep it simple, silly. Okay? Keep it simple. What's a simple way to describe the harmony?
Constant.
Consonant. Yes, it's very consonant.
Open harmony.
Open. It's very good. All right. So consonant, all the pitches sound relatively good together. Open harmony. We don't have super tightly packed chords. The chords are very open. And this really connects well to the texture. How can you describe the texture of this example?
The accompaniment is accompanied by a lot of string instruments.
Okay, strings. But are the strings playing all the time? Are they really doing a lot of different techniques and different things? Just long notes, right? So how could we describe that?
Maybe slow motion.
Slow motion. Polyphonic? No, I wouldn't describe it as polyphonic. I'd say if we're going to use the main texture terms, I would call this homophonic, right? Most of the sounds are occurring in a similar way. But again, you're thinking too complicated, right? We just have 5, 1, do, 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 right? It's very simple. It's very simple accompaniment. Simple, clear, light accompaniment. That's the texture. We don't have the entire orchestra playing at the same time. You have few instruments adding chordal accompaniment, homophonic accompaniment, these long notes in the strings with little sparkles of color every once in a while. Little small instruments. All right? Anything else you'd like to add? Now, we've described it. All right? How can we analyze this? How can we interpret these two things? Now we know the genre. What's the genre?
Pop and ballad.
What's that?
Ballad.
Yeah, you could call it a ballad. Absolutely. You could keep it more simple and you could just say popular song or musical song, right? It's just a song, right? You don't have to make it too complicated, right? Now, here's an interesting, quick little aside. A lot of people confuse these. What's the difference between a song and a piece? Did we talk about this last time? What's the difference between a song and a piece?
Song has words, lyrics.
Song has words. Piece does not. All right? So if you're talking about a Beethoven string quartet, you would say, let's listen to this piece. You wouldn't say, let's listen to this song. There's no words. So this is a song, right? Now, how does it make us feel? What are our interpretation of this?
Affectionate.
Affectionate.
It is relaxing.
Relaxing. I think that tempo rubato makes it very relaxing. You can just see an image of Dorothy on the farm. I used to get made fun of a lot because I'm from Kansas, and that's where this movie's from. So, simple, relaxed, comfortable, affectionate, almost like she's imagining another world, right? So, let's think about this. Now I have another version of this song, exactly the same song, different performer, different style. All right? How can you describe this person's style versus Judy Garland's style? All right? Sorry, I cut it off just like that. So, how is this different? So, go through the same process. Describe. How can we describe this? It's faster.
Simple accompaniment.
Simple, still simple accompaniment, but the accompaniment is different. What's the accompaniment? Ukulele, right? We had an orchestra, now we have ukulele. What about the rhythm? We already said it's faster. Was there any tempo rubato in this one? No. It was very stable, steady, right? Now, in the melody, he did some interesting things, where Judy Garland is always singing on the beat, but in this example, is he always singing on the beat? Not always. What do we call that when someone sings off the beat? Where over the rainbow, syncopation, right? So he's not always doing it, but there are moments where he will sing syncopated. He will have the downbeat and then he sings like a 16th note off, right? This creates a totally different feeling. Harmony is very similar, right? This is the same piece, but there's some major differences in the melody. Did you guys notice that? What are some of the things he did in the melody that were totally different than the way Judy Garland sang it, the way it was originally written?
There's something it's like making Hawaii.
Right.
I haven't heard it anywhere else in the world.
Okay. So you've even identified the place that it's from, right? Can you say it louder so everyone can hear? Hawaii. Very good, right? So we know that this is from Hawaii because of the musical style, right? We can hear where the music is coming from. So instead of da da dee da 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 da, he's going da 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 dee da 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 da, right? He's adding these extra little interruptions. And so as the melody goes down, and usually if you analyze it, you can actually see that the melody is just a scale. It goes all the way down. But what happens in the second version is the melody goes down, and then he'll go back up, and then he'll approach it from the top again and go back down. So it's a really interesting way that he connects our tonic to our tonic, where Judy Garland kind of goes there directly, but this performer, now I got to say his name right because he's Hawaiian, Israel Kamakavikole. Kamakavivaole, right? Everyone just calls him Is, right? He was a very famous Hawaiian musician, played the ukulele, very large fellow, all right? But you can also discuss the differences in the tone colors between their voices. She had a much higher, very bel canto style of singing, where he had a much more deep sound. So, totally different types of style. Same music, different performers, different types of style. These are some of the things we're going to try and talk about today. How we can apply different terms and different ways of looking at music. And we're lucky enough to have some live performers. So, now, when we talk about musical style, we're lucky to have two groups sharing with us two distinct chamber music styles. Now, we talk about this chamber music. What's chamber music versus music for the concert hall versus parlor music or at-home music? What's chamber music?
Music played in a small room.
Music played in a small room. A chamber, right? So here we have a chamber ensemble. We are in a chamber. So that's why they're called a chamber ensemble. We have two different chamber ensembles with us, and they're very different styles. Very different. So I'm pretty excited about that. So I'm going to give you a couple, just like last lecture, I'm going to give you some vocabulary. It's going to be a lot of words. Maybe not everything you could remember in one day, but something that you can try and apply it to real sound. And I'm going to ask our musicians to maybe give us some small little playing examples so we can attach a sound to a word, right? So when we talk about instruments, they each have their own distinct color, their timbre, right? And that's because of the overtones, right? Playing an instrument made of wood sounds different than an instrument made of metal, or an instrument that's played with a reed versus an instrument with a string, right? And these all create different kinds of sounds. So I'm just going to talk about the instruments that we have playing with us today, right? So that way we can hear kind of what some of these sounds are. And then while we're listening to their performance, you can try and apply some of these vocabulary terms to the color. All right? So the string family, and we know there's four families in the orchestra. The string family is the largest, right? It's the largest. In any orchestra, the bulk of the players are going to be in the string family. Now, we can break them into smaller groups. We often call this by the Latin number. If it's one person, it's called a solo. 2 people, 3 people, trio, 4 people, quartet, quintet, sextet, septet, octet, nonet, and then deco, right? And we get some of the other crazy terms. Now, if you notice, there's a lot of really famous pieces that have these kinds of titles. Now, there's lots of quartets, lots of quintets, but then we get into some sextets, maybe not so many pieces, septets, octets. Stravinsky wrote a very famous octet. Nonet. Anybody know a famous nonet? No? What's that? Yes, 9 people. So Aaron Copland wrote a very famous piece called Nonet for Strings. And it's for 9 string players, 3 violins, 3 violas, and 3 cellos. All right? It's a really interesting piece, really cool style, but that's Nonet for Strings, if you're interested in looking that up. Now, we have violin, viola, cello. Sometimes we call it the violoncello. Double bass, also called bass or contrabass, all right? So we have different ways of describing it. Now, of course, violin, cello, viola. We don't have a bass with us today, but that's okay. Now, here's the tricky part, and I'm going to ask you guys to help me. Can I borrow your violin? Is that okay?
Yeah.
I'm kidding, okay? So, the challenge of any instrumentalist is you should be able to name all the parts of your instrument in English. So, let's test you guys, all right? So, let's start here. These are called strings. This is the bridge. Now, this is scroll.
Gear.
Nope. The peg, tuning pegs. Now there's 2 parts of this. We have the black part and we have the back part here. The black part's called the fingerboard. It's where we put our fingers. The back part's called the neck, right? Then we have this part here. The body. We have these magical things here. The F holes, right? Then we have this.
Stretch ball.
Now, I've always called it the tongue, right? The tongue. We also, now this one's a little harder. This little piece of wood is a special piece of wood right here.
Pillow.
Not the pillow. So basically, you have 2 points of contact for the string, the bridge and here. This is called the nut. The nut, right? So the nut and the bridge, this is where the sound comes from. Now, we also have, most violinists use this and this. Chin rest, right? Now, all instruments should have a little piece of wood, there it is, on the inside, right? What is that called? Very important that a lot of people forget about, and if it falls over, it's terrible. Because you got to get a little tiny tool, stick it in there, and put it up. Anybody know what it's called?
Pillar.
Pillar is a good term, but it has a specific musical term. Anybody know? So, if you look, the way that a violin produces sound is you play the string vibrates, the vibrations go into the bridge, which then go and vibrate throughout the body. But there's a piece of wood on the inside that connects the top part of the body to the bottom of the body. Anybody know what that's called? It has a special name. If it falls over, then all of a sudden the instrument sounds very hollow, very empty. Right? It's called the sound post. Sound post. Yeah, pillar is right. It is a pillar, right? But it's called the sound post, and it's made of a really light wood So that way the vibrations can go through the bridge and into the violin and make all the sound bounce around. So then it shoots out of the violin, and that's where we get that nice, warm sound of the violin. So hopefully all of you should be able to describe all the parts of your instrument in English, right? Now we also have this, right? Bow. Okay, now what's this? Bow hair. Now if you ever work with an English-speaking conductor, you have to know these words. What's this part of the bow called? The frog. What's this part called?
Tip.
The tip, right? So they could say, play this passage at the tip. Play it at the frog, right? Totally different sound between here and here. Changes the sound, right? Now we also have, this little circle has a term. It's called the screw, right? And then we have the bow hair and then the back of the bow. So, all right. You should know all of the parts of your, thank you very much for letting me borrow that, all right? So, I didn't drop it, I promise. Okay, strings, fingerboard, bridge, body, neck, head, scroll, tailpiece. Now the tongue is also called the tailpiece. I call it the tongue. Tuning pegs, nut, F-holes, sound post. All string instruments, have a sound post, right? Even a piano has a sound post, something similar. It's called a sound bar, but basically a piece of wood that connects the metal frame of the strings to the rest of the piano, so that way it can build sound and vibrate. That's what creates the sound. Any questions about this? Now, when we're talking about the string family, we can talk about how they sound together and how they can sound separate. So when all of the strings play together, they have a particular sound. Can you guys just play like a C major chord? Can we just do do, mi, so, do, something like that? Can you guys just play a C major chord? Okay, but all together, right? Just do a chord together at the same time. There we go. Right. So how can we describe that sound? These four instruments playing together. Anybody have a thought? Now, we typically break the strings into voice types. So we call the violin anybody know the voice type? The soprano instrument, right? Because it plays the high notes. Then the viola, the alto. Then the cello, tenor. But the cello can be both the tenor and the bass because it has a very large range. Now, we're going to use that term a lot in a couple minutes. Range. What does range mean? R-A-N-G-E. What's the range of an instrument?
How many notes?
How many notes, right? The piano has a range of 88 notes, right? But the range of an instrument is what's the lowest note to the highest note. Now, we can break the range into different areas. And the way that we do that, and I'll give you an example with the violin, is it's a soprano instrument, meaning it's a high voice instrument, but it has different colors. So we have the low range if we're playing on the G string, so maybe just play something Sol G. All right, very nice. So how can we describe that sound? This is what we call the low range, the low register of the violin. Say it again. Sad, okay, yes. It could have just been the piece that she played. Say it again. Tight. Tension, yes, tension, right? Now, as you take the G string and you play higher on the neck, right, or higher on the fingerboard, you create a wider, the string is thicker. So when it vibrates faster, it's going to have a different color than if you played that same note on a higher string, right? We call this deep, vibrant, and sonorous, right? Thick, because the string is thick. Sonorous, meaning it has a very strong sound. And as you go higher on the G string, it becomes very intense. Intense, because you have a very thick string that's vibrating very fast. Now, as we go up to the middle register, can you play something in the middle register? Zhong. Just whatever you want. All right, very nice. So how is that? That's color is totally different, right? How can we describe that? It's brighter, yes. It's more delicate, yeah. Any other thoughts? Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to go a little faster, but less distinctive. Now, this means that when violins are playing Sol G, you know it, right? You can tell when a whole violin section is playing Sol G, it's a very special, distinctive sound. But if they're in this low middle register, the D string, it becomes less distinctive. We have a harder time saying, oh, that's the D string. But it has a much warmer and lyrical sound. Now, I use a lot of these kind of things when I am composing or if I'm arranging something. If I want a particular sound, I know that I should use the range of the instrument that's going to sound the closest to what I want. If I want a warm and lyrical sound, I'll use the middle to high register of the violin. If I want a very intense sound, I'll use the low register of the violin. Now, as we go higher, let's do something on the A and the E string. Okay, very nice. Very nice. Now, how is that different? Again, the color changed, right? It's a slight difference, but the more you hear it, the more you can identify how the color is changing. It's brighter, absolutely.
Piercing.
More piercing. Gentle, yeah. I mean, especially butterfly lovers, very gentle, right? Now, striking, it did have a stronger presence, right? It's not, we have less distinctive, but now we have a much stronger sound, but it was soft and lyrical. And as you go higher on the A string, it has this lyrical, it's almost like singing, almost like the voice. Now, let's play something on the E string and really go as high as you want. Yeah. Okay, now can you play something super high? Okay, yeah. Now, just on the E string, the lower position and the higher position, totally different part of the sound, right? And you'll hear, when we listen to the Messiaen later, you'll hear a lot of very high violin. And that has a very distinctive sound. How can we describe the lower E string and the higher E string? Any thoughts?
More piercing.
More piercing, right? As we go higher, the sound becomes more piercing. Now we can say brilliant, which is very bright. Luminous, meaning almost like you're looking at the sun, right? Really, it can kind of burn through your soul if it's Stravinsky or something like that, right? And the higher you get, the more piercing it gets, all right? So again, I don't want to take up too much time because I want to give them a chance to play. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. And we're going to cover the viola and the cello real quick, but we'll just cover some of the different sounds, all right? So let's talk about the viola. Now, viola, alto instrument, different colors based on the string. If we start with the low string, now this is the only string that's different from the violin. It has a particular, can you play something on the C string for us? Very nice. So this is what makes the viola a viola, right? This is that special sound. Now it's got a larger body, so that gives us a lot more resonance. We say resonance because there's more space for the sound to vibrate in. But we can say somber, right? Something that's almost a little sad, right? Austere, forbidding, right? Forbidding. Maybe if we want some kind of sound that gives us this feeling that we shouldn't go there, right? Now as we move up through the viola, can you play something a little higher? Ah, good, very nice. So as we go higher, the sound is going to, now we have the G and the D string, and then we have the A string, but most of the time if we're doing a Mozart or something like that, the viola unfortunately doesn't have a very exciting job. They just get to play these bum, 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 bum ideas. And that usually happens on these two strings. And that's just to fill in the color. We call that an accompanying sound. But the viola overall is dark, has a darker sound, but she also played some things on the A string, and we use this word, the word that I use the most in the way my voice sounds today, nasal. What does nasal mean? It sounds like this, right? Now, no offense, this is a particular color, and the way that we use the color is how we can describe the sound that that instrument is making. Now, if she were to play something really high on the A string, it would really have a piercing sound, and it would be very powerful, right? Because if you took, both the violin and the viola have A strings, and they're the same pitch, same strings, but this one is a much stronger sound than this one, right? Because of how the instrument is built. All right, any questions about this? Let's move on. Let's jump to the cello. I don't know why I have to click so many times. So now we say tenor and bass, especially high cello. It has a very nice tenor sound. Of course, different colors based on the strings. So why don't we start with the C string? Can you play something on the C string? Now, we talked about this term last lecture, rich, right? What does rich mean?
A lot of frequency.
Okay. Let's let all the other people have answers. Okay. Lots of frequencies, what are different frequencies? What is it that we're hearing? Overtones, right? The bigger the instrument and the lower the pitch, the more overtones we can hear. Now, the violin, of course, has many, many overtones, but they're so high that we can't hear them all. But when you have an instrument like the cello or the bass, it creates a lot more overtones. That's what gives us this rich sound. If you ever see an orchestra that has too few basses, their sound will be too hollow, right? It'll be missing overtones. We don't consider the basses necessarily solo instruments, but if they're not there, you can tell because you're missing all these overtones. And maybe you can just feel something's wrong or something's different in the sound, but then you add the basses back and you say, oh, that's a totally different sound because they add so many overtones to the orchestra. We always say tune to the bottom, tune to the lowest note, because that's how we fit our sound within the overtones. So can we go a little higher? Can you play something mid area of the cello? Sure, yeah. Okay, so definitely a change in the color of the tone. How can we describe it? Now we have G string and the D string. Now the G string is the least strong. When we say carrying power, what does that mean? Anybody know? If a cellist is playing a solo or a cadenza, and you write a whole bunch of things on the G string, it's going to be relatively soft than if you wrote it on the C string or the D string or the A string. Because that part of the instrument doesn't have the ability to push out as much sound. We call this carrying power. The ability for the sound to go all the way to the end of the concert hall or the room. If you say voice has carrying power, a singer, say you need to carry your voice all the way to the end of the room. This is what the D string of the cello is lacking, right? It doesn't have this. As we go up, it becomes more warm, more lyrical, very strong sound. And then we get up to the A string. Can you play something on the A string for us? Whatever you like, okay. Good. Now try something up in thumb position. Yeah. Right? So as she was playing in the lower part of the string and then she gets up in thumb position, that's why we call it thumb position, because they have to use their thumb. The sound changed, right? So as we do very brilliant when it's in the lower part of the A string, but the higher you get, the more piercing it becomes. Piercing is like if you take a knife and you, right, pierce something. If the sound is piercing your eardrum, that's piercing sound. Sometimes that's what composers want. They want that kind of sound. So you can absolutely have this idea of piercing sound. Now, we don't have bass with us, but since we're talking about the string family, I just wanted to show you real quick. Now, the bass is a little different in its construction because it's tuned in fourths instead of fifths. And it has, of course, the biggest and the thickest strings. So it has a much different kind of sound. We say thick and heavy on the E string. Some basses will add a C extension. You see this, the extra thing that sticks out, and that makes it an even lower, thicker, heavier sound. As you go up, warm, sonorous, meaning it has a nice vibrating full sound. And as you go higher, you tend to replicate some of the nasal sounds of the viola, and you get very high, it becomes very thin. What does thin sound like? How can you describe a thin sound?
Less volume.
Less volume, right? Same thing in the piano, right? As you go up to the higher register of the piano, it becomes very thin. You know, we can say this, sonorous, full, round. You do the same thing here, right? Less sonorous, less rich, but warm, right? If you're playing some melodic ideas, it can be lyrical, but you get up high, it's thin, right? Same three chords, same open positioning, root, fifth, third, right? I'm playing it in an open way, and this is very thin. It's almost like you have a thin piece of paper and you can just tear the chord apart, right? That's what we call thin. All right, any questions about this? Is that all the people dancing outside, all the ladies? No? We should go join them. All right, now, we don't have do we have our clarinet player here yet? Maybe when the clarinet player arrives, we can ask them to play a little for us. I'm going to go ahead and talk about it before they come. Now, the clarinet is actually a very special instrument. It's an alto instrument, has some really interesting sounds. Now, the clarinet is based off of an old instrument called a chalumeau. And so we actually call the lowest part of the clarinet the chalumeau range. This chalumeau. This is the predecessor of the clarinet, and it had a very distinct sound. And when the clarinet plays in the very bottom range, we call that the chalumeau range because it reminds us of that old instrument. Oh, great. So, I mean, take your time. Go if you want to kind of get your clarinet out. I'll keep going. And, if you want to get set up, take your time. No rush, all right? Okay, as we go up, it has the throat tones, and it actually is in the throat of the clarinet. So it actually feels like you're kind of squeezing the throat of the instrument, which is why it has these kind of sounds. It has a very pale sound. Then we go up, clarino. It's almost like a trumpet. And then we get very high, piercing, and shrill. All right? We're talking very high, upper 5 notes of the clarinet. All right? Think Stravinsky. Stravinsky loves this sound. All right? You hear a lot of this in Stravinsky. All right? So let's go ahead and welcome our performers, all right? So actually, we'll just wait till you guys get set up and you can play a little for us. We can talk about the range a little, all right? So take your time. Don't worry about it. So now I have so let's all give them a big hand. So thank you very much for playing with us today. Now, this is Beethoven's String Quartet in F major, all right? This is based off of his 9th piano sonata, all right? And he arranged it for string quartet himself. And if anybody wants to study orchestration or arranging, this is a perfect example. Look at the piano sonata and then look at the quartet. You'll really learn a lot about Beethoven's musical style, all right? Now, when they perform, try and apply, describe, analyze, interpret. How do the instruments sound? What range are they playing in? Put the new vocabulary we just discussed to good use. Don't try to listen to everything at the same time. All right? Focus on the melody. Then you feel like you have a good way to describe it. Focus on the harmony or the rhythm. But if you try to listen to everything at the same time, it's too much information, and then you can't focus. So try to listen to one thing at a time. Now I want you to ask yourself 2 questions, and then we'll discuss these questions after they play. How can you describe Beethoven's style? Right? How can you describe Beethoven's style? Try to take it from this piece, because we know that his style changed over time, but we can try and describe it in the context of this piece. And then, is this piece classical or romantic? All right? This is a good question. So let's go ahead, welcome our performers, and you guys just play, and we'll just listen. right, that was great. That was wonderful. That was very good. Thank you very much for playing. So now, I hope you guys were thinking about this. So how can we describe their performance? Now, listening to a live ensemble has so many benefits as opposed to listening to a recording. So I'm so thankful. Thank you guys very much for playing because it gives us so many more things that we can talk about. So who wants to go first? How can we describe this? Say it again. How can we describe this piece? Anybody taking notes? Yeah, what, do you have something? Say it louder.
I think it's classical because I think it's brilliant.
Okay, so classical. Now we're talking about brilliant. Now brilliant is kind of a color term, right? Is romantic music brilliant? Is Baroque music brilliant? Is 20th century music brilliant? It's all of those can have brilliant music. So using brilliant as your decision to say it's classical maybe isn't the strongest argument, right? So, but let's start with the style, right? This lecture is about musical style. So how can we describe their interpretation of the style? They played it stylistically very nicely. So I think there's a lot of things that we can talk about what the style is. And you guys can add in if you have any ideas. Feel free to, because you guys know this piece better than all of us, so feel free to share some ideas. Yeah?
Always struggling.
Struggling, okay. Now is that a description, an analysis, or an interpretation? That's an interpretation, right? A struggle, but we need to say why. Why is there a struggle? We have to describe what it was we heard to tell us what the struggle was. So do you have anything that makes you think why it sounds like a struggle?
Sometimes fortissimo and subito is pianissimo.
That's very good. This is very stylistic Beethoven, right? You really hit the nail on the head, right? Sometimes it's very loud, sometimes it's very soft. This is a stylistic trait of Beethoven, right? Now, we'll get into a little more detail on how they play it, and I have some small suggestions, all right? Anybody else? Now, there's way more things that we can talk about. What about the melody? What about Beethoven's melody? When we talk about melody, we can talk about, remember, keep it simple. Does it go up? Does it go down? Is it consonant? Is it dissonant? How can we describe it?
We often hear a lot of fast scales.
So a lot of skips, all right?
Fast scales.
Fast scales, right? Can you play, for first violin, can you just play the first, like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 bars? Just first violin. All right, so that right there is scalar, right? It's just a fast scale running down. Now, would we consider this very singable? Is this like a Mozart melody? No. Da, 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 right? No, it's kind of a little different. So Beethoven's style is not so much about these very singable, catchy melodies, even though he does write some very nice melodies. I'm not saying he doesn't. But when you compare it to Mozart, not the same. This is a key aspect of Beethoven's style. Now, what about the rhythm? What about the rhythm? What's that?
Syncopation.
Syncopation? Absolutely. There's lots of syncopation in this work. You can see it a lot, especially at the end, right? And that's the challenging part, is letting us hear the syncopation instead of modulating a little, right? And playing it on the beat instead of playing it off the beat. That's a little tricky. All right? What about the harmony?
Traditional.
It's pretty traditional. I think that's a good word, right? It's very, what's the word we used last time? Progressive, right? It has a progression. It goes from 1 to 2 to 5 to 1. Sometimes he has some movements to dissonant chords, but then he resolves it right away. So it's very traditional. It's very typical harmony, all right? Now we can talk a little more about the colors, because he uses these four instruments in really unique ways. He uses them as a quartet. How can we describe the texture now? How is Beethoven using the texture? Can you guys start at 14? Just play 14, 15, 16, 17, 14 to 18, 14 to 19. All right, so how can we describe that texture? That's great. Thank you guys so much. That's awesome. I'm so happy we have live group. We can do stuff like this.
It sounds like a dialogue.
Sounds like a dialogue. Okay, that's an okay word. What else? Homophonic? Polyphonic. Yeah, so it sounds polyphonic because we hear four different voices. But the thing is that they're all playing in the same harmony, right? So it's not independent voices. And if you want polyphonic texture, you need independent sounds, where this is more within one structure, one chord. So this is more homophonic. There is another word, though, that we do use when we talk about polyphonic music that describes this texture. Anybody know what it is? The first instrument was cello, then second violin, then the viola, and then the soprano. Say it again.
Imitation.
Imitation. That's correct, right? This happens a lot in Renaissance stylistic music. We have an introduction of a theme or melody, and then it imitates in all the voices. So we hear the same scale, right, or the same type of passage that's being passed around. We also call this four-voice texture. Four-voice texture. Because we have, starts in the bass voice, goes to the alto voice, then in the tenor voice, then in the soprano voice, right? So, and if I could make one small suggestion, try doing it all piano, right? But every time a voice comes in, right, just for a moment, it's just a little louder, but it's still piano. We're still in the context of piano. And then we can talk about some of these dynamics. So can you try it again, 14? And try to keep everything piano. Okay, so that was nice, but we still need to hear all four voices, right? So it was a little too soft here because we want to hear, we want to hear all four. So try it one more time, but within the context of piano, but we have to hear every voice. Okay, good. So, can you guys hear the difference? Can you hear the texture of the four voices, right? Now, it was a little hard for us to hear the viola, right? Because the viola is playing in that middle range. So sometimes the viola has to play out a little more in order to keep the same context. Now, here's an interesting thing about Beethoven, all right? Here's an interesting thing about Beethoven. Beethoven loves to use these kind of marks in his music. So we have basically the texture, and I'm going to write it here. Hopefully you all can see it. Basically, all of this section is piano. And then he writes crescendo, right? Crescendo. I'm left-handed, so it's hard to do. Crescendo. Then he does this. SF, right? What does that SF mean? Sforzando. Okay. Now, should it sound like keep forte? Now, what's important about Beethoven's style, right? This is very important, is that it's an SF. So he's telling you to play that note loud. But it's in a piano section. So he's not telling you to play piano, 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 forte, forte, piano, piano, right? He's telling you to play piano. And then for this particular moment, it's just a little louder, right? It's not a jump out of the sound. It's just piano, but this particular note is maybe mezzo piano because it's within the context. And as it crescendos, this SF, if it's in piano, might be mezzo piano. But if you're crescendoing and now you're at mezzo piano, then this SF now means mezzo forte, right? So it changes. As we get louder, the SFs also get louder. And then we get to the end, we have forte. So SF each time should be slightly louder than the one before. So when you get to forte, you've had this sudden change from here to here. And that's what creates Beethoven's style. That's what creates the drama. Can we try it once like that? Do you guys understand what I mean? Yeah? Can we try it? Okay, good. And don't get softer. You did a decrescendo, right? Right? It ends strong, right? Because this is the end of our A section, right? And then we have a rest. So, just a quick little note, right? Here, this rest. Now, I want to try this, see if I can put it up. I don't want to lose too much time. This is a very important technical moment. It's called the MC. Anybody ever study sonata form, sonata theory? Yeah? MC means medial caesura, middle stop, right? So it actually is when we go from the A section to the B section. So if you study Beethoven's style, Beethoven's form, he introduces his idea, and then he creates energy. And the energy builds, and we get to a forte passage, which is the one that we're listening to. Starts very soft, builds energy, climaxes at a forte passage. And then we have this MC. It's usually just a rest, right? But what we need is the following B theme is almost always piano, right? And in this case, it's piano. So this rest is telling us that we need time for the sound and the energy to go away back to piano. So my suggestion, and of course, you can do it however you like, but as you get to this crescendo to forte, and stay forte all the way to this moment, and then stop, wait for the energy to go away, and then go, right? It'll be a totally different effect on the energy of the music. Can we try it? Is that all right? Start at 14, build the energy, stay at forte, let the energy disappear, and when you're ready, then you go. Yes, all right. That's very nice. Now, could you guys feel the energy? Energy goes, it builds, and then we hit this moment, and then we release, and then we have this. Now, that was maybe a fraction of a second too long, but you got the idea right? This is how we create style within our music. We have to understand why composers are doing it this way, because when Beethoven writes in sonata form, right, and this is a version of sonata form, he always uses a type of medial caesura, some way to release the energy. And as performers, we have to have time to let that energy go away. All right? So the last thing I'll mention, so that way we have time to listen to our other group, is that we talk a lot about dynamics in Beethoven, right? We have PP, P, MP. Sorry, my handwriting is not pretty. Then we have F. And then we have F, F. Now, what does pianissimo mean? More soft. Any other thoughts?
Most soft.
Most soft. That's a better translation. We have fortissimo. We have pianissimo. Now, this is very important to style. Issimo, I-S-S-I-M-O, in Italian is called a superlative, right? It means the most, right? It doesn't mean P and then a little softer, because we're talking about Beethoven's style. If we were talking about Mahler's style, that's not the same. So, in this piece, this is soft, and this is loud. FF does not mean louder, it means as loud as possible, right? PP does not mean softer, it means as soft as possible. Now, there's a catch, because if you play as soft as possible, maybe not everybody hears it. So it's as soft as possible with good sound, right? But if you notice, really good orchestras, when they play Beethoven, the sound explodes. It explodes. And it's because they're playing forte, and then they're playing as loud as possible. They're not playing louder. So it's not just here, forte, and then a little louder. It's here, and then it explodes. That's Beethoven's style, all right? When it comes to dynamics, that's very important, all right? So I'm going to go ahead and move on just a little bit, but I'd like to say thank you very much for playing for us, all right? So I summarized basically this piece, and this is how I did it. Now, we didn't answer our question. Is it classical or is it romantic? Raise your hand if you think it's classical. Raise your hand if you think it's romantic. Okay, you all are smart. You didn't raise your hand at all right? It's a classical piece. It's a classical piece, all right? It was written still in the classical era. Beethoven's that bridge. So this was still early in his career. So it still has classical sounds. Classical style, we consider melody, short phrases, balanced phrases. We talk about harmony. We talk about functional, simple harmony, clear, clean. We talk about rhythm, steady. Once we start it, it stops or it keeps going. But then we also have syncopation. So Beethoven's starting to infuse some of this more romantic ideas. You have a question?
When did the romantic style start?
So, I mean, if we're talking years, we're looking at 1800, right? So 750 to 1800 is what we consider the classical period, right? But when we're talking about Beethoven's romantic style, we really say Symphony No. 3, right? Symphony 1 and 2 are considered classical. 3 through 7 are romantic. And then 8 and 9 we call mature, right? Now, here's a little idea of how I would describe this piece. If I can. Beethoven was looking contemptuously at us the whole time. So, melody, short, balanced phrases. They're only 4 bars, right? But it's really interesting, if we were to study the music, that it starts on an upbeat, that the melody starts on an upbeat, which I find really interesting. Starts on the upbeat, scalar motive. You guys nailed that one, all right? Then we have rhythm, syncopated rhythms, creates drive under a cut time feel. Now, cut time, instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, we have 1, 2, 3, 1, right? It's a more open feeling. And then later, towards the end, we had triple versus duple. We had the syncopation in the cellos and the viola, and then we had the triplets in the strings. So juxtaposition means to put 2 different things next to each other. Harmony, clear harmony that juxtaposes major versus minor. Now, this is a classical key term, Sturmendrang. Anybody study Sturmendrang style? This was a particular technique that composers of the classical period used, basically from 1760 to 1780. So we're talking a lot of Mozart, Haydn, early Beethoven, use this technique. It means storm and stress. It's this idea of pitting different contrasting ideas next to one another. And if we could go more in depth into this piece, we could really hear the changes and the differences between loud and soft, short and long. These articulations, they're creating what we call the Sturm und Drang style. All right? Creates contrasting emotions. Now, when we talk about texture, it also applies to texture, right? Long, short in the articulation and the note values. There was one section where the violin goes da 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 da, and then the second time it goes da 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 da, right? We call this diminution, right? We're shortening the value of the notes. That'll be more important in the Messiaen. Now, for voice texture, moments of imitation, right? 4 voices. If you look at the piano sonata, the original, he has this, but not in the same way. He orchestrated the string quartet differently than the original. It's not an exact copy. So that's why understanding Beethoven's style, you can really learn a lot by studying this piece and the piano version. Color, dramatic utilization between light and heavy, strong and soft, or strong and weak. Right? Again, this Sturm und Drang idea, contrasting 2 emotions. And form. Now, this form is called a sonata rondo form. I had the benefit of knowing what they were going to play in advance. All right? Sonata rondo form is a little advanced, but it's typical of last movement sonatas. A piano sonata was typically 3 movements, right? Fast, slow, fast. The last movement, a sonata rondo. Now, we hopefully all know that a rondo, A, B, A, C, A, B, A, or variations of this. A sonata rondo, in this case, for Beethoven, A, A, B. So he does the original A theme twice, but he only does half of it. It's like he uses the introduction for the other half of the theme. We consider this the exposition. Then we have A, so there's our rondo, the A comes back. But now we have C, this is where the development starts. So every time the A theme comes back, it's always in the same key, always in F. And then C, he develops it. Now this development section is very long, very long. And this is where we start to see the romantic side of Beethoven coming out. If Mozart were writing this piece, this development section would be very short. But in Beethoven, it's 2 or 3 times longer than these sections. So that's the romantic part of Beethoven. He's starting to expand it. Then comes back to A, and we have B, A again. That's our recapitulation, but he does it in a different order. And then we have a small coda. So still a rondo, A, B, A, C, A, B, A, but it has these exposition, development, recap ideas inside of it. So we call it a sonata rondo. It's a very popular type of form. Any question about that? No? All right, good. Now, we have to change gears, okay? Now, one thing I think is really fascinating, and if those of you that are playing on the Messiaen, if you guys want to go ahead and get ready. So is everybody here?
那个香的重播组同学会准备一下。
So if you guys go ahead and you can set up over here and get ready. We're going to do a little experiment. All right, so this is one of my favorite paintings, and I always use art when I teach music, because last lecture we talked about drawing the sound, right? And how we can use that to help us. Art is a great indicator of style. And if we look at the art of what's going on at the same time that the music is written, we see a lot of similarities. Now, this is a very famous piece by Kandinsky, who is what we call an expressionist painter. And he has a specific style. Now, I told you last time that describe, analyze, interpret comes from the art world. And then I just applied it to music. So we're going to do a little experiment I'm going to ask you some questions. Now, we're not going to answer them out loud. I just want you to answer them in your head. And I want you to see how close the answers you came up with here relate to the music we're about to listen to. All right? So, let me ask you some questions. We're going to start with describe. All right? First question. What shapes do you see? Now, don't answer out loud. Just think what the answer would be. What shapes do you see? Are the lines thick or thin? Okay. How do you see colors? How many colors are there? Are there any particular shapes that you can see repeating themselves? Now, let's analyze. Next step up. Is there a particular place in this painting that your eye goes? We call it the focus. Is there a central focus? Is there a beginning and an end to this painting? Could the painting continue this way? Could it continue this way? Could it continue this way? Or that way? Again, these are just things you have to think to yourself. How do the colors go together? Again, we're analyzing. How do the colors go together? How do the shapes go together? And then let's interpret. How does this painting make me feel? If I could have one word that described the emotion of this painting, what would it be? Does this painting tell a story? Does this painting tell an emotion? So, all of us most likely had different answers to those questions, all right? And I'm sure none of them are the same. But when I look at this painting, I'll just tell you real quick. I see a pianist, and they're playing, and all the music is coming out of the piano. That's why it's my favorite painting, because I'm a pianist, so I see a piano player here. This is the person, this is the piano, and then all the sound comes out. And that's how I interpret this painting. Now, everyone's interpretation is different, all right? So, we could go through the terms, but I'd rather not. I want you to try and remember them, and we're going to listen to this wonderful, amazing piece, and we're going to see if the style is the same, all right? Okay, so I would like to welcome our performers, all right? All right, thank you very much for joining us. Now, anybody know who this wonderful, beautiful man is here? This is Messiaen, all right? He's a very famous French composer, right, living in the 20th century. Now, we talk a lot about terms and what period does this composer belong in. And a lot of times we talk about modernism and postmodernism. Messiaen is a little hard to categorize. He's early enough, he could have been a modernist, but he's different enough, he could be a postmodernist. So the way that we describe his music and his style is very unique, and you'll find that as you get in the postmodern period, which is basically the second half of the 20th century, it becomes harder to say that composers are writing in a similar style. They're just not. So their style is specific to the person. So we say Messiaen's style. And we can talk more in depth about this. But again, this is going to be the first movement from Quartet for the End of Time. It's called the Crystal Liturgy. do the same things that we did with the Beethoven. Describe, analyze, interpret. This one is going to be a little more challenging, all right? Just so you know. Don't focus on too much, or for sure you will get overloaded. Too much sound in this one. And questions to consider. How can you describe Messiaen's style? And if you had to put it in an era, what would you put it in? Now, I've already talked about modern and postmodern, but there's a lot of others that you can put it in, all right? So let's go ahead and welcome our performers, all right? And hear a little bit. Now, go ahead and just do, I know you guys did the first 2 pages, right? So just do the first 2 pages, and we'll do the last part after, okay? So we'll just do this first part. Yeah, you guys can stop there, that's fine. All right. So this, I'm sure it's obvious to hear. It's an incredibly difficult piece to perform, all right? So let's go ahead and open it up. How can we describe this? How can we describe this music? Now, it's important with this piece to keep it simple. Keep it simple. If you try to get too complex, you're going to have a hard time finding the right words. So keep it simple. How can we describe the melody?
Big leaps.
Big leaps, yes. Broken. Absolutely. Yeah, we have one idea, and then we have another little idea, and then a little idea here. How else? Static. Okay, absolutely. But static for the melody, I don't know if I'd put that in for the melody. I would use that more to describe the harmony, right? Harmony and the atonality. Okay, that's if we're talking about harmony. So let's go ahead, harmony. So we have one vote for atonal. Anybody think it's tonal? Now remember, the word tonal and atonal don't exactly mean tonal is major scales, right? Tonal just means we have a tonal center. Right? It's very difficult to hear, but if you were studying the piece, you could make an argument to say that it is tonal. You could also easily make an argument to say it's atonal. So, something to think about, right? And we probably don't have time to get into the details of what it probably is or isn't, but it's definitely, you're on the right track, the right terms, all right? How else can we describe the harmony? So we've got static, we've got atonal,
Dissonant.
dissonant. Yes, can play the first chord in the piano. All right? It's weird because it's a mix of some nice tones, but some not. And the way that they're spread out, so it's definitely dissonant, but it's you can have a little more to describe it. What about the rhythm?
Irregular.
Irregular, very irregular. Could you find the downbeat? No? So, we'll ask the performers, is there a downbeat? Does anybody know what the meter is? It does. This piece has a meter. It has downbeats. So this piece is in 3/4. Right? Let me look at, I got to make sure. Yeah, 3/4. Okay. But Messiaen intentionally obscures, we say obscure, covers up the downbeat. We say ties across the bar line. Because he doesn't want us to have a sense of one strong and then a weak beat, right? So we can say there is meter, but it's very weak, it's non-existent. We could say it's timeless, static, all right? Now, what about the color? This is where we have a lot of words to describe this. And we have different colors based on the instruments that are playing, right? And that's why in the beginning I wanted to give you some words to talk about, because the cello has a color, the piano has a color, the violin has a color, the clarinet has a color, and they're all different, right? So let's start. Piano, can you just play a little bit of the beginning? Just maybe the first stanza there. Okay, that's nice. So, that's quite difficult, right? Let's give her a hand, right? So, how can we describe the color? Now, we can also, let's include texture as well, right? Because these two really go together in this piece. How can we describe the color and the texture of this?
Close.
Close. So the harmonies, they're close and not close, right? And if you looked at it, the hands they're spread out, so you have open harmonies, but there's lots of notes in between. Sometimes there's minor seconds, sometimes there's thirds, sometimes there's fifth. They all work in close together. So you could say that it's a very unique, right, special sound. How else could we describe it? Tension? Absolutely. Right? And in the piano part in particular, there's tension in the harmony, how the chords are built. There's also tension in the rhythm. They're not always playing a steady beat. It's changing. And we'll get to that a little later. Now let's listen to the cello. Can you play your part just in the beginning for us? Yeah, that's very nice. Thank you. So, how can we describe that sound? Now, there's a technical term for this, right? But then there's also, we can use more abstract terms, more descriptive or interpretation terms. How can we describe this color and this texture? Thin, very thin.
Vague.
Vague, yes. What else? Squeaky, yeah. It is, and that's a characteristic that you can hear for a live performer. At maybe a recording, they might filter out some of those sounds. But I think Messiaen would have been very happy with that performance. Anything else? Does anybody know what he's doing? Can you kind of show us with your hand what you're doing to create that? So notice he has his thumb here, and then he's touching a higher spot. So this is a technical term. It's called an artificial harmonic. So a natural harmonic is when you lightly touch the string, different spots, and you're using the whole length of the string as your fundamental pitch. But when you touch it with your thumb, you're creating a new fundamental. And then you're touching what's called a touch fourth. I think these are touch fourths, right? And you're touching a fourth above that pitch. So it creates a harmonic that's 2 octaves above where the thumb is touching. So if you touch a C, then you will get a C 2 octaves above, right? And so he is actually only playing 5 notes, C, if I remember right, C, D, E, F sharp, and B flat. Is that right? 4 notes? I think it's 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right? Okay? But that's okay. We can talk about the importance of that later. All right? So now we have piano creating a color and a texture. Totally different than what the cello is creating. Now let's listen to the clarinet line in the beginning. All right, very nice. So how can we describe this?
Nasal.
Say it again.
Nasal.
Nasal, yeah, okay. Yeah, we could say nasal. But if it was an oboe, it would be way more nasal. So this is kind of written in that throat tone area, right? So it does have a pale sound. It has a pale sound. Now, it also, compared to what the piano is doing and what the cello is doing, it's normal, right? It's basically, it's melodic. It has melody, it has shape, it has rhythm. So compared to what's going on, it's totally different. Now, let's do the last one. Let's look at what the violin's doing. All right? How can we describe that? Right? Very high, piercing, thin, right? So all of these colors together created what it was that we just heard, all of them happening. Now we have specific ways we can describe these things. And since we're starting to get a little close to the end here, I'm going to show you my terms and words for this. Some of these terms are very technical. And if you haven't taken advanced theory classes, you probably have never heard them before. All right? Because when you study advanced style and advanced musical theory, you dedicate a whole unit to Messiaen because he's so unique and so different than what everyone else is doing. So, now, we've already talked about the style. Do we have an era we can call this? Anybody have an idea of what era this would be in? Contemporary. Now, that's a really interesting term. I'm glad you said it, but it's an interesting term. Contemporary means at the same time as something else, right? So Beethoven and Mozart were contemporaries because they were alive at the same time. Now, Messiaen is not alive anymore. He died in 1992. So is this music contemporary to us? Right, it's not. This piece was written in, 1941. So 80 years ago. Is it contemporary to us? Now, we use this term contemporary loosely. A lot of people say contemporary. But if we look at the actual definition of contemporary, it's not contemporary music, right? Contemporary music is the music that we're experiencing now, right? So, what else? I'm glad you said that word, though. Now, we've already said this bridge between modern and postmodern, but there's all these different styles of music inside of that. Impressionism, primitivism, expressionism, emotionalism, spectralism. I could keep going. I got to think about it. Minimalism. I don't know. Anybody have a guess what this one would be? It's not serial. It's not serial. We do have serialism, right? 12-tone system. So, just like the painting that we looked at, we call this an expressionist painting. An expressionist work because it's expressing a certain specific type of emotion. Now, say it again? Abstract. Now, abstract is a term we usually use for art, right? So you could say that the sound is abstract, but that applies to, there isn't a particular abstract style, right? You could say experimental, something like that. But saying that music is abstract is a good adjective, but it's not a style in itself. Now, one style that's often given to Messiaen that maybe doesn't 100% apply to this piece, but probably could, is spectralism. spectralism. Messiaen started this trend of studying the overtones in a sound and would create chords and sonorities that would be within that spectra. Spectra was you put the sound into a machine, you see all the lines, and he would analyze the lines, and he would say, okay, this first spectra is this note here, so he would write these notes in the chord. It's called spectralism. And then all of his students created post-spectralism. We get people like Murai and Grise who were Messiaen students and are continuing this idea. So, in the interest of time, I'm going to give you my terms, and then we'll talk a little bit about that last page. So, melody, irregular. You guys said that. And think about the painting we looked at. Were there regular lines or irregular lines? With a loose sense of beginning and end. Now, this clarinet and this violin part is birdsong. Now, this is very specific. And in the music, Messiaen says, now I'm going to give you guys a little test here. It says, Come on oisyo. What does that mean? This one right here. 这个什么意思? Oh, she's got it written down. 10 points for you.
Final coma is us.
Okay. As a bird. Like a bird. He literally says in the score, sound like a bird. Right? Now, the violin also says, son flöte. Well, I said it in the German pronunciation, but what does that mean? Didn't do your homework. You got to define everything in the music.
Like another bird.
No. Like a flute. Like a flute. Now, we call this flautando. Flautando. Do you know flautando bowing? So, flautando bowing is played upper part of the fingerboard. You rotate the bow a little bit to have half of the bow hair, and it has a different sound. So try it. Try it first time. Do it just normal bowing. Just normal. Now, try flautando. Right? It's a different sound. It's a lighter sound. It's a thinner sound. The higher you play up on the fingerboard, the less overtones you hear. So it's a more simple sound. And that's what Messiaen wants. He wants flute sounds. And he very specifically says what he wants. So you have to translate every word in the score, all right? Rhythm. Now, this is where it gets a little crazy. Messiaen was very famous for this. Extending durations of notes creates an unclear sense of time or beat. Static, cyclical, ostinato. What's an ostinato? Long? No, not long.
Figuration repeated again and again.
And a melodic or rhythmic idea that repeats over and over again. Now, he based this rhythm on Hindu rhythms, right? And it's called additive rhythms. So if he had 3 quarter notes, then the next time he'll do a quarter note plus a 16th. And every time he'll add an extra beat. That's why the music is never the same. And actually, if we look at the harmony, there are different sets of rhythm and pitch cycles. So a cycle means you do something how many times different, and once you get to the end, you start over and do it again. So you make a circle. Call this a cycle. Independent pitch and rhythm cycles creates an openness within a modal framework. We talked about modal, right? Okay. Piano is a 17-part rhythmic sequence. So there are 17 rhythms that she plays, all different. And then at the end, she starts over and does the 17 again. There are 29 different chords. At the end of the 29th chord, you go back to the first chord. This is where the argument of tonality comes in, because the first chord and the last chord always starts on an E flat. So, you could say there's a tonal center to this, but you have to wait 29 chords before you get there. Again, that's a bit of a... Cello is a 5-note cycle over 15 durations, 15 different rhythms. Half note would be 1, quarter note would be 1, 2/8 notes could be 1, dotted quarter note, right? 15 different sets on 5 pitches. So the artificial harmonics, going up or down, creating non-retrogradable rhythms. Now, I have a special slide for this. Anybody know that term? Non-retrogradable? It means retrograde is reading the line backwards. Non-retrogradable means it's the same this way as it is this way, right? So, I told you this one was a little more complicated, all right? Now, texture independent from one another. There are clear polyphonic and homophonic textures. This is a very clear example of heterophonic texture. 2 clear, distinct voices. Hetero, 2 separate things, right? This is heterophonic texture. Color, techniques used in the cello and the piano, which we listen to, create a sense of eternity. And this is what Messiaen wanted. He wanted this feeling of timelessness, of forever. The painting had no beginning, no end. It could keep going, right? So could this music. He just cuts it off when he gets tired of it. It could keep going, right? The clarinet and the violin make distant echoes of light and birdsong. So Messiaen actually has a quote. Form, I just put cyclical, right? Constantly going in cycles. You could call it through composed, meaning it's different every time, but I think this one makes more sense. Now, here's Messiaen's actual words of him describing this piece. Between 3 and 4 in the morning, which is strange because he wanted to paint eternity, and eternity has no time. The awakening of birds, a solo blackbird or nightingale improvises. Right? Surrounded by a shimmer of sound, by a halo of trills, lost very high in the trees. Transpose this onto a religious plane, and you have the harmonious silence of heaven, right? So, it's a very interesting dichotomy or juxtaposition of words that Messiaen is trying to create. Now, there's a lot of history behind this piece. He wrote it while he was in a prison camp during World War II. And the reason he wrote it for violin, clarinet, and cello is because they were fellow prisoners that played these instruments. And that's true. And this piece was very famous. There was like 5,000 people that watched the performance. And then the guards thought they can't be fighters. They're musicians, and they got out. It's really, and there's more to it than that, but that's one of the reasons why. Messiaen was a pianist. He played the piano part. He had a clarinet friend, and then there was another cellist and violinist in the concentration camp in Germany during World War II. It's really interesting, all right? Now, just to talk our last 2 minutes here, this is a mode. Now, real quick, the clarinet, can you just play your part at G? Yeah. Let's just hear the clarinet. Can you just do the clarinet part? It's this right here. It's the hard part, sorry. Yeah, just do this part. All right, thank you very much. So, mode, Messiaen had what he called modes of transposition, limited transposition. Mode 1 was a whole tone scale. These are all separated by whole tone. Mode 2 was an octatonic scale. They're all separated by whole and half steps. Mode 3 was a different mode. It's whole step, half step, half step. And then it repeats. So 3-note cell, right? So, interesting use of what's going on, but he's using this kind of theory in everything else. We also have non-retrogradable rhythms. If you look, half, dotted quarter, half, half, dotted quarter, half. If you read it from here to here, and here to here, the rhythm is exactly the same. This is called non-retrogradable. You cannot read it backwards because it's different. So the whole piece is based off these variations of non-retrogradable rhythms. And the last one, heterophonic texture. This is the texture of this piece. Piano, very homophonic. Cello, 5 notes with the glissandos. Birdsong, and the violin. You have lots of polyphonic textures. Everything's different. I didn't make this. I wish I did. Okay, this is by Gene Beringer, Lawrence University. But this is the clearest example I've found of heterophonic texture. All right? So, with that, I'd like to say thank you very much. All right? Thank you for playing. All right, I know it's a very difficult piece, so I'm really happy you guys were able to play it so we could have 2 totally different styles. So I hope you learned a little bit about how you can use style to discuss different types of music. All right, any questions? All right, very good. So the last lecture is going to be in 2 weeks, and it's going to be about rehearsal language, things that conductors say or use. I have a plan, and I haven't talked to Professor Binbin yet about it, but you mentioned it. So one of my good friends and former colleagues is Peter Solomon, who's principal horn of Shanghai Symphony, and I invited him to come with me so he could share the performance side, and then I can talk about the conductor side, so you can hear from someone who's played with all of the big name conductors and see what his opinions are and my experience as a conductor, what kind of things we talk about. All right? Thank you very much.
For coming tonight and let's accept the next excellent lecture together with his friend, and they will do it in as a person as a way. So come back.
Thank you.